everybody, welcome back to my quarantined kitchen. We're going to start with some interesting recipes today. We're going to be making a gluten-free cornbread, and we're going to be making a vegan Tuscan vegetable soup. I'm really excited about getting started with these, so let's go ahead and begin.
Okay, let's check out the ingredients for this recipe. We have... My gluten-free flour of choice today is going to be sweet potato flour. I have my farinha de fubá, which is a cornmeal. I have granulated sugar, baking powder. It does call for salt, but I don't have the right salt, so we are going to skip that. I have 2 eggs at room temperature, 1 cup of soy milk, and then I'm going to use a 1/4 cup of my plant-based margarine for this recipe. We're going to start by mixing all the dry ingredients together in a bowl, and then we're going to mix in the wet ingredients as well. If you are not a baker at home and you are missing a lot of the materials, that's nothing to be worried about. I'm going to show you how to do this with a spoon and a fork and a coffee cup as a measuring cup, because I don't actually own one. So that's the fun part about my videos. We make it up as we go along. So we're going to get started with our dry ingredients. There's an amazing little farmer's market store, health food store here. It's like right by my house where I get my gluten-free flours from. They make flours out of the weirdest things. Flours out of green banana. I didn't even know that was a thing. I would like to see the process of how that's actually handled. Because it just sounds like it would be. Yeah, considering what a flour is, I would be interested to see what that looks like. So we have a cup of that. I've also never tried sweet potato flour before. Usually I'll use coconut flour, almond flour, or just Bob's Red Mill gluten-free flour if I can find it. But today we're going to try something a little different. So it's 1-to-1 with these. So 1 cup flour, 1 cup cornmeal, then a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, So this recipe is technically not vegan because, as I mentioned, I am using eggs. If you wanted to skip the eggs and make this a vegan recipe, all you would have to do is either use, you could use a banana, or you could use a flax egg, which is a tablespoon of flaxseed mixed in with water, and you let that soak for a minute. It's a lot of sugar. Okay. Then 2 teaspoons of gluten-free baking powder. I'd also use this time to preset your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, or I think I have it at 230 Celsius. It's a little warm, but my oven is horrible. Brand new baking powder, and we are looking for 2 teaspoons of this. And then it calls for a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, but my salt will not melt because, as I explained in my last video, I use the rock salt, the really big crystals. So that just won't work. So now I'm going to use a regular old everyday spoon to mix the dry ingredients together. And then we are going to add in the wet ingredients. I'm going to have to melt my margarine because it calls for straight oil, and I don't particularly care to use straight oil, but because my margarine is solid, because it's not warm enough, I'm going to have to do that. Okay, 1 cup of dairy-free milk, or if you're not doing the whole vegan thing, if you would rather use regular milk, that's perfectly fine. Different strokes for different folks. I'm allergic to milk, so I have to use dairy-free. Or in my case, I'm using soy milk, which is going to give it a nice flavor. Something else you could do, instead of some of the eggs, you could use applesauce, you could use a banana, you could use a tablespoon of honey to give it that nice honey cornbread flavor. It's all up to you. This is a very customizable recipe. It's one of the reasons I love it. I would be using a whisk if I owned one, but alas, I do not own one. So we're using a spoon. I have an eggshell. It's going to jump. There we go. I had a termite problem in my apartment. That was probably the most disgusting thing I've ever encountered. Only in the bed, though. None of the other furniture has been affected. So we had to completely get rid of the bed. So now I'm sleeping on a mattress on the floor because we're in quarantine. And there's no way to get a new bed at the moment. So that's fun. My quarantine adventures here in Brazil. It's what I did today. We moved out the old bed so that it can be disposed of, and then we went through and inspected, and then applied a pesticide, and then I bleached the floor, and it's just really gross. Okay, so I'm going to go melt a quarter cup of my margarine quickly, and then I will be right back. Okay, and now we're back with the melted margarine that I'm going to add to this mixture. I would recommend being very careful with how hot you get the margarine, or just use regular oil, because if it's too hot, it is possible to actually cook the raw egg in the mixture, and that's nasty. So it's just a little recommendation, but because of the kind of oil that I have to use, yeah. Anyway, so we're going to mix that up. I'm using a non-stick pan, so I'm not worried about the batter. I'm not going to add additional oil, but if you are not using a non-stick pan or a silicone pan, then I would recommend buttering and flouring before you put the batter in. Otherwise, it'll obviously not bake properly. Okay, so now that that's mixed, sitting here in silence, you're just watching me scrape stuff into a bowl. So mine's going to be rather thin. This will make a 9x9 pan. You can also turn this into muffins. I prefer muffins because they're already pre-portioned. You don't have to worry about cutting out of a pan. But I don't have a muffin tray. So we're working with what we got. Spreading it so it's evenly dispersed in the pan, obviously. You don't want it too heavy on one side or too heavy on the other, because then it won't cook properly. And then we're going to put this in the oven at, I think it's 425, 230, whatever, for about 30 minutes. And then we'll pull it out, let it cool, and you can serve it along with the soup that I'm going to show you how to make in just a moment. So, into the oven we go.
All right, our cornbread has come out of the oven. Now, because it's not a gluten, or it doesn't have gluten, it doesn't have that xanthan gum rising agent in it, it is going to be a little more dense, as is custom with gluten-free baking. But as you can see, it turned out this beautiful golden brown color. If you look carefully, you can see that it started to come away from the sides. It's a little darker on the edges than I would have liked. However, I still think that's going to be absolutely delicious. I'm going to cut this in probably 8 to 10 pieces, and obviously serve a piece with the bowl of soup that we're about to make. So there you go. That is your gluten-free cornbread. Okay, so now we're going to get started for the Tuscan vegetable soup. There's a lot of moving parts here, so I'm going to show you the ingredients. I'm going to prep them, and then I'll come back on camera and I'll show you how to put everything together in the pot.
Super easy to make. It's a one-pot meal. That's the reason we love it. So let's cover some of the ingredients. We're going to start with a can of cannellini beans. And then we have our fresh and frozen vegetables. I will buy vegetables in bulk, and then I will chop them and freeze them. So the things in Tupperware containers are frozen. One comment about freezing your vegetables. They will not have the same crispiness that they did when they were fresh. That's kind of an obvious thing. What they are really good for is if you're making purees, or if you're making smoothies, if you're making baby food, or if you're making soups, where they do have kind of a mushy texture when you cook them. That's the best time to use frozen vegetables. Otherwise, try to keep them as fresh as long as you possibly can. So, back to the ingredients over here. I have the cannellini beans. I have an onion. It's more than an onion, but we're going to use pretty much all of that in the soup. I have a zucchini, chopped and frozen. Our zucchinis are very pale here, whereas in the U.S. they have a darker skin. I have my carrots, cut and frozen. And then I'm going to cut about 4 stalks of the celery off, and then I'm going to chop it and freeze this for when I make vegetable broth. We also have a can of diced, peeled tomatoes. And then we get into our seasonings for the soup. Garlic, a little bit of oil. I'm using Magi bouillon, 2 cubes, so it makes about 4 cups of broth. I'm using black pepper, a mixed herb. The recipe calls for like thyme, sage, that sort of thing, and that's what this is. It's a combination of seasonings. And then the only thing left would be salt that I'm going to add gradually because I don't like my food to be really salty. Because my vegetables are frozen, I can put all of my ingredients into one pot and cook it that way. If your ingredients are not pre-chopped and pre-frozen, if you are using a fresh carrot, which I always recommend, if you're using a fresh carrot or a fresh zucchini, fresh garlic, whatever, I would recommend that you cook your onion, carrot, and garlic together, let them soften up and start to become fragrant. Then throw in the other things with the broth and let them cook that way. I'm not going to do that because my things are already frozen and they'll all cook at about the same temperature because they were pre-frozen. So I'm going to go ahead and prep everything and have it laid out so it looks nice and pretty for you. And then I'll show you, well, you're going to watch me put things into a pot. But anyway, so I will be right back. We're back. I've got everything portioned out. And now we're just going to literally add everything to the pan and then put it on the stove to cook. So in front of me, I've got my vegetables. So I've got my 4 stalks of celery, these are pre-cut. So it's probably the equivalent of about 2 carrots, a carrot and a half, 2 carrots. About a half an onion and about half of a full zucchini. And again, if these were not frozen, I would be cooking the carrot, onion, and garlic together. And then as I put in the liquid, I would add the celery and zucchini. Everything's frozen except for the celery. So it's all going into the pot at the same time. I shall not make a mess. I got my Deadpool pajamas on today, guys, because you have to wear pajamas to do the quarantine kitchen. It's just required. It's a requirement. I could move this closer so you could see what I was doing. That'd be a smart idea. Sorry, guys, I get distracted. Okay, so the vegetables are in. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of oil. I usually don't cook with oil, but this helps the vegetables cook. Actually, I think the oil is for when you're sauteing the vegetables, but it's what's in the recipe, so I just follow the recipe. It's just how it works. Okay, my tomatoes were some assembly required. I thought I had bought diced tomatoes, but I did not. I just bought peeled tomatoes. So I had to put them in a bowl and dice them myself. So there's the tomatoes and a can of water. I did not drain the tomatoes. It is absolutely tomato and its juices. I did drain the beans. This is going to make probably about 4 portions. That's what I aimed for with this recipe. What you don't see that I'm doing over here, I'm trying to get all of the tomato juice out of the bowl that I used. So one of the portions of water I'm using to rinse out the bowl to get all the flavor. So if that looks weird, it's because of this. Okay, so that's all the main ingredients, and now we're back to just seasonings. I'm going to put my 2 bouillon cubes in. Some garlic. I like garlic. I always add more than the average person, but that's because I like it. I'm going to add my herbs to cook in front. The salt I'm going to add throughout the cooking process. I'm probably not going to do that on camera because there wouldn't be much for you to see. But for right now, I'm going to put the herbs in so that they can blossom and they can bloom. They can bloom while the soup is cooking. And then I'll add salt as I do my taste test throughout. So there is no accurate measurement. I'm on my recipes, it's season to taste. Some people like a lot of seasoning. Some people like a little seasoning. I'm somewhere in the middle. I like my foods to be fragrant, but I don't want them to be so seasoned that I can't tell what's in the dish. And then I'm going to mix this. And then I'm going to put it on the stove at about a medium heat. Let it come to a boil. And then as it starts to simmer, I'm going to turn the heat down. And I'm going to let it simmer for about 25 to 30 minutes. Tasting every 15 minutes or so. There's nothing raw in this as far as something that can make you sick. So literally right now, if I wanted to, I could just eat this as it is. I'm not going to because that would not be delicious. But don't be afraid to taste this. If you put raw chicken in a meal or raw hamburger or something like that, then no, you can't taste it as you're cooking. You have to wait for it to be cooked first. This, as a vegetable soup, doesn't have that problem. So, yeah, I'm going to put this on the stove over medium heat, let it come to a boil, turn down the heat and let it simmer for about 25 to 30 minutes. And then when all this is finished, I will plate it and I will take a picture along with the cornbread that we made today. And that's it for our recipes.
And this is what our meal looks like when it's all finished. You've got the vegetables in the soup and a nice piece of cornbread. Happy cooking, everybody.